Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers, James and Justin back at it again. And tonight we have a special guest. We have Neal Bakshi. He is a fellow YouTuber, but he is known as an angel medium. He is a spirit guide. He is a healer. I think he does life coaching. He does Reiki energy healing. And on his YouTube channel, he says he's got his best-selling book called Banking on Angels.
Whoa, he's a jack of all spiritual trades.
Yeah, so we won't keep you waiting. Let's get right into it. Neal, welcome to the channel. Good to have you. This is great. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super looking forward to this. You guys get some really cool, interesting guests on. You guys talk about some very interesting perspectives, spiritual teachings. So glad to be part of this.
I thought maybe a good place to begin for our guests who are new to you might be with like your story. I know you have a pretty fascinating story of how like you kind of came into this place where you are right now in your life. Maybe you'd like to share that.
Absolutely. No, and thanks for asking that. So giving the quick rundown, the condensed version, I grew up in a spiritual family, meditating since I was 5 years old. My family raised me on Paramahansa Yogananda's path called Self-Realization Fellowship. He's an Indian monk who came to the US in the 1920s to basically spread meditation and spirituality in the West. His book, Autobiography of a Yogi, was actually the only book Steve Jobs had on his iPad, and everyone at his funeral got a copy. So I was raised on this spiritual path, basically learning how to meditate from ancient scientific and yogic techniques of meditation. And then at the age of 12, I decided I just wanted to make a lot of money and become an investment banker. And so from that moment on, I basically started investing my own account. I started reading the Financial Times. I went to NYU where I studied economics and history. And then after a decade after I decided that, I landed my first job on Wall Street. And then very shortly thereafter, I landed my dream job at Goldman Sachs as an investment banker. And I did all of the things you can imagine, wearing my pinstripe suit, going to board meetings in Midtown Manhattan with high-powered executives, and flying across the country for closing dinners. And over my time there, I spent nearly a decade on Wall Street. I closed over $100 billion of transactions and made my way to VP. And so everything was going amazingly well. And I was like, oh, I'm living my dream life. This is perfect. And as just when you think everything is going according to your plan, life has its way of bringing in another narrative. And so in 2020, my mom went for a 30-minute outpatient thumb surgery to fix a partially torn ligament here. And they actually couldn't arouse her after the surgery. She was intubated, rushed to the ER on life support before ultimately passing on 3 weeks later. And so from that moment, I basically looked to solace and how I could find peace within myself. And so I went back into my spiritual roots, my meditation upbringing, and I started to receive messages from outside of myself for the first time ever in the first 3 months of 2021, telling me that I needed to help people. And I've never received anything like that before. I was like, what's going on here? And then as that year went on, many people might resonate with this. I started to notice repeating number patterns. And I was like, okay, this wasn't just once or twice a day. And because I was sitting in front of a screen that was flashing Bloomberg numbers at me all day on the markets, I was like seeing them 30 to 40 times a day. And I was like, there's something weird happening here. And then I would research about numerology and the energy of numbers and meditate on it. And I found that there was a language here, and I was communicating with what I now know to be angels. And then after that happened, I was like, can I communicate with my mom on the other side? And then that immediately started coming through. And then over the course of sort of 2 years since her passing, I was guided to various spiritual healing modalities, from breath work to energy healing to plant medicine ceremony therapy to coaching modalities and numerous others. And so my life became this tide of purpose that was starting to pull me forward instead of me pulling my career up a corporate ladder, to the point where I decided, I'm going to drop these golden handcuffs and the prospects of basically a managing director and $1 million salary laid out in front of me to pursue a purpose and a calling that's much higher than myself, to be of service ultimately, and that's where we are.
What an amazing story. You were like a wonderkin. Like you had such a meteoric rise. And the thing that's interesting or stands out to me about your story is the progressive nature of it, is finding almost like a limit to that material abundance. And then I don't know if you're familiar with spiral dynamics, but it reminds me of a progression in that realm, you know, moving on to second tier actual spirituality.
Another thing kind of that spoke to me in your story was that your spiritual past seemed to be triggered by something pretty awful, and which is turned into something good, obviously, now. But how it's amazing how many stories have started with something traumatic happening to us, something brutal. And I wonder, sometimes, is that something that is like necessary? Is this something that like we all have to like go through, or is it just, you know, some people?
You bring up a really interesting point, and I was actually thinking about this recently because I'm giving a talk on this exact subject. So it's like, what I think about is there's caterpillars, right? And so when caterpillars are born, they have within them what is called imaginal cells. And the caterpillar may not be consciously aware that it has these imaginal cells in it, but they're basically these different cells spread out all throughout the body of the caterpillar. And then when the caterpillar goes into its chrysalis about 18 days or so after it's born and starts to transform into this complete mush where it basically doesn't know what it's turning into, the imaginal cells at that moment activate because they know it is turning into a butterfly, and they actually communicate with one another, come together to help transform the caterpillar into a butterfly. And so it reminds me of that because I think oftentimes there is necessarily a big catalyst where there's something that needs to jut us out of our everyday experience to say, okay, I need to start asking various existential questions now. Because what happened to me was I was like, who am I? What am I doing here? What's my purpose? How could this happen to my mom so suddenly? And then when I started to realize, like, okay, I'm not just going through living a narrative that's just sort of fed to me, just sort of chasing the money, but there's actually a broader construction to everything that's happening around us. That's when you actually slow down to be ultra present, to then start to notice these signs, synchronicities, symbols. And then that actually starts to tell you, like, what are you actually living in? What is around you? And then that starts to sort of, as you come to spiral dynamics, elevate the consciousness upwards.
It reminds me of a concept I know a little about called Katabasis, which is essentially the idea is at some point in your life, you're going to find something that pulls you down, essentially. And you can either choose to endeavor into this phase of life, or sometimes it'll be something kind of outside of yourself that pulls you into it. And it pulls you into a phase of like reflection and I guess maybe some spiritual seeking from within. It's actually, there's different names for that. You know, it is a documented phenomenon, I guess, that happens in people's lives. But it sounds like you came out pretty good on the other side. So this is maybe a very ignorant question, but were you actually able to, through your work, contact your mother through these means?
Yes. So this really started to unfold in 2021. So 2021 was when I went really deep into meditation, and then started to be like, okay, I'm communicating with angels. And that didn't just become like, oh, instantaneous. It was first like, okay, there's numbers, like, okay, like I'm being told messages. And then that started to evolve. And I was like, can I ask for specific signs? And then as I would ask a question, I would maybe go for a run, and like something was written out in chalk from a kid the day before, or I would see something in a window. I lived in Manhattan at the time. So there were all different ways that I could receive these things. And I was like, okay, can I ask for very specific signs and receive them? And then would basically leave and be like, okay, I want to see a person that looks exactly like this standing on the subway platform next to me. And I would go to the subway, and literally that exact archetype out of 10 people in midday Manhattan would be standing next to me. I was like, okay, there's really something happening here. And then I was like, okay, can I have a dialogue with these angels? And then I'd go into meditation and start to have this dialogue. And in the beginning, it really feels like you're kind of making it up. And there's this huge push-pull dynamic between my egoic consciousness, which is like, there's no way this is real. You're making this up. You're going crazy. And me being like, no, like there's actually a lot of faith here. That's like, there's something broader than myself that's actually communicating with me. And then when I started to really trust into that and listen to that, I would have these dialogues. And then I was like, can I communicate with my mom? And then almost instantaneously after that happened, that came through. And the way it comes through for people who are curious is it comes through in three main ways for me. It's clairsentience, audience, and clairvoyance. And so I'll see visions. And so sometimes the visions will either be symbolic, but then with my mom, it was like very clearly her. And I was like, wow, it's like, it's you. And I would like feel her giving me a hug, and I would have conversations with her. I would ask her questions, and I would have a dialogue to the point where I would break down crying in the middle of a meditation because it was so real to me. And I was like, wow.
That's
And then
amazing.
yeah, and I would actually only do this for myself for about a year because I was still working at, the most white collar place in America. And I was like, if I told anyone this, like they're gonna be like, you're an absolute nut job. And so I was actually only doing this for myself for about a year. And then I went to a breathwork certification retreat, and I randomly just told a couple of people, I was like, oh yeah, I do these angel readings for myself. And then people were like, oh, can you do them for us? And I was like, I've never done them for anyone, so don't expect anything. But here we go. And I did it for like 5 people at the retreat, and they were like, some people started sobbing. People were like, that was exactly what I needed to hear. One person was like, you were channeling something. And at that point, I didn't really know anything about channeling or anything. I was like, I don't know, like what's happening. And then life just gave me opportunities where over the course of a year, I've now done hundreds of these angel readings. And then the mediumship stuff has started to really come through more profoundly in the past handful of months. But it's all like self taught in a way, it's self explored. I haven't really like gone really deeply into learning mediumship basically from someone or anything like that. It's like a cultivation of this. Yeah.
I thought a good question, maybe to bounce off before we go any deeper, might be for people asking the question, like, what do you mean when you're talking about angels? Because there's so many spiritual belief systems out there that have these ideas of what they think an angel is. What for you is an angel?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I'm super glad that you asked that clarification because I actually wasn't raised on a typical like Catholic or Christian religion where angels are like these big things. They actually aren't big necessarily in the spiritual path I was raised on at all. And I call them angels because of angel numbers, actually, because that's how I started to relate to them. I was like, oh, I'm communicating with angels. But to me, what they are actually is there's this singularity of source consciousness. And so some people, it's source, spirit, universe, God, whatever you want to call it, it goes by bajillion different names. This singularity becomes infinitely fractalized. And as it becomes more and more fractalized on some of the densest layers, you have us humans. We're these physical beings, we're opaque, you can feel us, there's billions of us. So we are a dense fractalization of this singularity of source consciousness, light consciousness. As you pull that fractalization back up into itself, that is to me the realm of angels. But actually what it is it's your higher self. Because there is this singularity of source consciousness that becomes more dense and more fractalized, as you pull it back up, that's your higher self, because that higher self is actually a version of you that becomes more dense. A really good way to conceptually understand it on more of the physical level is with our eyes, we can only see the visible spectrum of light: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. However, there's all different forms of energy that percolate our existence that we can't see with our eyes. X-rays, gamma rays, UV rays, radio waves, microwaves, they're all there, they're real, we know they exist, but we can't see them. Similarly, we can't necessarily see these angels with our physical human eyes, but they're a faster frequency and lighter density of light energy. And so I still view them as a being outside of myself so that I can sort of have that communication and understand it better. But at the end of the day, it actually is your higher self.
Is your higher self okay? So there's been only like maybe a couple of instances in my life where I've gone into prayer really seeking an answer, and I felt as though I it seems like I got an answer. Is that, would that be your higher self? Like when people go into prayer, is it sometimes their higher self, or are you always going right to source? Would it be fair to assume that some of the times, if you're actually getting a sense or a feeling of some kind of like verification of something, would that be your higher self?
It's interesting because it comes back to this point that all is ultimately one. And so when I say angels and or higher self, to me, it's like the angel is like the heartbeat of source, for example. So it all trickles back up into that innate oneness or singularity. If you want to see it as either way, like people talk about like your spirit guides or your spirit team, yeah, like you can absolutely receive those messages from your guides or your team, but it's also that intuitive nudge, which is that inner gut feeling, which is again kind of linked back into this singularity of oneness consciousness, where in this singularity, all is known, all truth is apparent, all knowledge is there. And so from this, you can receive that energy.
Interesting. When it comes to angels, I've heard you talk about how many someone might have. They might have like one, or they might have five, which kind of rung a bell because in our studies on Islam lately, we've kind of learned that in Islam they believe that everyone's given five angels, and so when you said five and five, I was like, oh, interesting. So I guess my question would be like, how does someone determine how many angels they have, or how do they get in contact? What would be the best way to get in contact with at least one of them?
Yeah. So again, I come back to this point of I personally still view them as entities outside of myself for ease of being able to communicate and more conceptually understand in a human mindset. Because when you're like, oh, I'm communicating with myself, that's like 2 layers removed, and then this other version of myself that's 3 layers removed, it starts to get convoluted a little bit. However, coming back to sort of how people can understand how many they have, or the way I see it is like when I'll open these ceremonies for people, it'll come into me as like a number, and I'll basically be able to see like just energy. Like I won't be able to see like eyes or a face or anything. It'll be like, oh, like there's like 3 distinct energies around this person. And so what that can mean is like these are beings that are either this being spirit team, this being's angels or protective mechanism that has known this being for a number of lifetimes. The best way to do it, and it took me a while, it's genuinely going into meditation and then intuiting and feeling into it to the point where first you have to do it for yourself to the point where you're very clear and saying like, okay, I know who I'm communicating with. In the beginning, you're like, humans are actually obsessed with names, being like, oh, what's my angel's name? Like, I really want to know their name. You can find out their name, and that's like, there's ways to do that. It's like you go into a meditative state, you can like project yourself up onto yourself and basically look at your higher self and your angel and basically ask them. But it can take some time. It doesn't necessarily, for some people, it can happen instantaneously in one journey. For some people, it can be like 3, 4, 5 times, and they're like, oh, okay, I think I pick up on this name. But what I've realized is like you need to have the individual receive it themselves versus having them being told it from outside of themselves.
Also, just kind of like a spin-off of there, so you've been also kind of talking about spirits, your mother's spirit kind of getting in contact with you. How does the flow of spirits work after death? Like, do they remain on earth with us, or is there like a heaven? Like what's the system, what's the function of what's happening?
Yeah, really awesome question. So from what I have understood, basically self-taught my experience receiving all of this, there's a period of time after the individual passes on or crosses over where the veil is quite thin between the physical realm and the lower and higher astral planes where they are ultimately departing to. In that time period, what can really happen is that's actually a very beautiful time to start to create a sign that you share with that person. So for example, mine was a rose. And so you then start to see these signs come up everywhere. Or even what I've heard other people tell me is like lights will randomly flicker on and off while they're talking about this person, like a door will randomly open. these various ways, but that is actually ways that the other person is trying to basically tell you like they're okay, like everything is okay. Because when we just transition from one form of energy to another. The soul is limitless and eternal, whereas the body is limited, and everything on this physical plane is change and will die. And so what happens is the way I perceive this is the soul will then have this veil of thinness, and then ultimately it goes back into an astral plane. And so, depending on sort of how much karma potentially a soul needs to work out in various levels of energy, it'll be in either this lower astral plane or potentially even this higher astral plane. And it's very difficult to explain this because when you experience these states or these fields, it's like pure energy consciousness. So like there's no form that I perceive in it. It's just like thought consciousness that's like a line of energy that's just like scribbling around. And it's very difficult to kind of like explain these various planes. But the way I perceive it is if they go into this lower astral plane, higher astral plane, and then there's ultimately this causal plane, which is just even higher, even more connected to that singularity. And it ultimately is dependent on sort of how much karma in a way that this soul ultimately needs to work out or what it ultimately desires to learn. And a lot of it comes also from how many desires you have as you leave Earth. So if you're very attached to material things and you die with a lot of desires and a lot of unfulfilled needs, a lot of regrets, for example, well, then you're basically saying like, oh, I want to reincarnate so that I can experience XYZ that I didn't experience. So that transitory state as the soul crosses over is actually incredibly potent and powerful to determine how much of that additional desire, material karma, whatever you want to call it, it chooses to want to work out.
So the individual chooses whether or not they get to reincarnate or not, or is there a system that says, no, 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 you gotta go, you have to do it again?
It's a really interesting question because at this point it comes down to sort of my personal belief of what I see through this, right? And so I think it is in a way it's kind of individual designed because it is all individual created because there is only you and even I am simply a projection of you. You are the thought consciousness that has chosen to create and live the reality that you are living. And as such, you've placed me here as a symbol for whatever you chose to place me here long before you sitting in this role decided that you were going to meet me. So I think to an extent, it's actually you decided because there is actually only you because there is innate oneness.
And I guess it's all going back to source anyway, right?
That's kind of the way I view it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's very. Reminds me of the law of one. I guess. Are you familiar with law of one? And I find the more like interviews we have with spiritual, like-minded people, there's things that are a little different here and there, but there's a very similar pattern.
So much overlap.
Yeah, there's a very similar pattern that I'm noticing.
I used to do this thing called a shaman's walk, where I'd go into a town that I'm not familiar with or whatever, and I would just kind of let myself be guided. And I ended up in like a witch store, like a witch's coven store or whatever. I started talking to them, and I was like, so I'm doing this thing. I ended up here, and we all kind of knew what we were talking about. And they were like, just work on diminishing your ego. Just work. Like they were almost like a Buddhist take on things, right? And you mentioned karma. Like from your perspective, what is karma? And yeah, just how would you explain what karma is?
Yeah. The way I view karma is the result of an action. So it's basically every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? So it's sort of like, how do the daily actions that we take result in a corresponding resulting action that occurs either instantaneously? So for example, you'll hit a tennis ball and the tennis ball will be lobbed over, or maybe it's something more energetic. Maybe it's like you have a really deep grudge against someone and you consistently think about that person and send them a lot of hateful energy. And maybe over time, that energy percolates your body, it percolates their body. Maybe that manifests as a physical illness. Maybe that manifests as a form of cancer or physical dis-ease. Well, comes down to everything being vibration, frequency, and energy. So the way I view karma is every single action that we take, actually every single thought that we even have, carries a corresponding energetic frequency with it. And what we are then fed in return is a result from that frequency. And so that often comes to really talk about things like resonance, the law of resonance. Well, the frequency that you resonate at, you will be given like for like experiences. So if someone is always like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this. I always get rejected by the person I like, and I'm always going to be single for the rest of my life. And then if they continually tell themselves that narrative, well, then they look back 20 years later and they're like, I told you so. Well, you're only saying I told you so because that's exactly what you were saying the entire time. That's the only energy that you were creating, so that the universe was saying, you know what, I'll resonate with you at that frequency. Or if you want to resonate in the frequency of gratitude, then you'll be given more and more instances with which you can be grateful for. And so to me, karma is allowing yourself to basically be met like for like with situations. And it's this ever evolving wheel. And what I've also come to understand is that if you're stuck in this like loop of karma where you're basically like, why does this same situation keep happening or keep occurring to me? Or like, I thought I was done with this. The way that you can actually completely stop the inertia of the wheel is through forgiveness. Forgiveness, and then ultimately self-forgiveness, that completely stops the wheel of karma in its path.
That sounds like a message that our world for today could really use. Which kind of like leads me into my next question is about world issues and what's going on right now. What do we do? Like, what is the next step for humanity? What are we supposed to be doing to fix the mess that we're all in right now?
Yeah, this is a really awesome topic to talk about, simultaneously sensitive as well.
Yeah.
But what I'll say is, from my own personal experience, what I've realized, someone who worked in finance, watching the news, watching financial media, watching all types of stuff on TV all the time, I stopped basically watching news media and reading the negative articles that came out so much. If you look at actually the vast majority of the articles you'll see that are posted all over any main media site, I'll say 8 out of 10 of them are probably drastically negative or skewed towards creating additional fear, creating additional divisiveness, additional separation within our society, because that is actually how sort of these larger governing bodies can actually continue to maintain control over large masses and populaces of people. The way that we actually move forward, and if you're in this frequency and you vibe with this stuff, this will get you. You'll feel this. However, if you're not there yet, you might feel this is like, oh, like this is like a usual thing that someone would say. You are the thought that is thinking itself ultimately. That's what I've come to realize through meditation. If you feed the negativity with more negativity, more woefulness, more anger, more hatred, you're breeding more of that energy, as we just talked about resonance. The way you actually start to help these people and help these situations facilitate themselves to higher levels of consciousness, as you want to talk about spiral dynamics, is feed it with love, feed it with empathy and understanding, but feed it with a ton of love. And all you can do is just send love and forgiveness and care to that energy. It's not about like, yes, empathize with them, but the more you sort of just ruminate on the negativity and the tragedy and the horribleness and all of that, the more that is only going to perpetuate, percolate, and continue. The way you actually break through that is, how do you allow yourself to come into these deep states of love? And Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this all the time as well. Having multiple people, hundreds, thousands of people hold a group meditation where they'll basically send peace or love to a specific instance or area. And he actually has various studies where he has measurable outcomes on how these mass meditations and mass peace movements actually work to dilute a lot of the negativity that happens.
Is skepticism negative?
In what respect? In what context?
Well, looking at sort of the dualistic nature of reality, like what is negativity and why do we encounter it? Like, I mean, like I've read lots of books on, positive thinking, positive affirmation, law of attraction, that type of thinking. I had a therapist once, like a clinical therapist, that literally just said, like, just, here's a book about think more positively. But some of us are sort of fascinated with darkness. Some of us, we encounter it, you know what I mean? And I've met people that are like unabashedly positive. Like, you can't make this situation positive. They won't allow it. They'll just spin it and spin it and spin it. And it works out nicely for them. And I've actually seen people take themselves all the way down by being fixated on darkness, on like the negative aspects of life. I've seen that play out. But what is it? What is there a lesson to be learned there? Is there any value in the negative things of life? Just briefly, It's not like a happy subject, but maybe we could unpack it.
No, totally. And coming back to your nature of the dualistic spectrum, that's what we're operating on here. The ego actually needs to survive because that's how we operate in the dualistic world to make sense of, well, is a lion going to eat us or are we safe here? And so if you want to come into sort of this Zen view, nothing is either good or bad, it just is. And so how do you actually allow yourself to come back into this space where you are actually not separated from this innate oneness of singularity? I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this book. It's called A Course in Miracles, and it's a really amazing text. I read it every day because the whole concept of the book is basically love is real, and anything that is not love is not real, is an innate separation from that singularity. And so it's kind of like, how do you come back into this space of like realizing that it's not good or bad, it just is, and I'm part of this being of love energy. But then while people may be like, okay, give me more like tangible, like there is negative stuff out there. Yeah, how do you understand it, fully integrate it, but allow yourself to be so forward thinking and believing that change is possible for the future and that you hold the vision and that is going to become reality, right? You even think about athletes, musicians who work their entire life to be like, oh, I grinded for years and then it became this reality. Well, they held the vision, they held the thought. Because they are the thought that's thinking them itself, they created that reality because of their innate drive and belief that it was their reality.
And how do you stop the ego from hijacking the whole thing? You know what I mean? Like sometimes it seems like what would a roadblock be on the path? Like there have been times in my life where I felt like I was getting somewhere spiritually, maybe meditating a lot or something, and then quite honestly, I could just see that my ego. I've got a strong ego, and it would take hold, and it would be like I'm getting somewhere. So how do you essentially avoid being the character in the Bible, for instance, where Jesus essentially says, you're wicked because you want a mirror. You're wicked because you're looking for a sign. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get out of that selfish realm when you're essentially trying to like make your life better and be a radiant light of love?
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of responses to this. One is let go. Like continue, it's a continual process of letting go. And once you think you've let go, well, let go again. Because what happens is we get to this point and we're like, oh wow, as you say, I'm really making a lot of progress here. I'm like getting really deep in meditation, or I'm getting really spiritual, or I'm starting to see through all the ego's paths. But the second you actually believe you're there is actually the biggest trap that you can fall into.
Yeah.
Because as you continue to evolve, the ego continues to evolve because it says, well, if I'm done away with, then I can't not have a purpose. I can't not be here. So it will continue to basically almost match that level. And so you'll get these glimpses and you'll maybe be at that level of consciousness for a little while. And then life situations may happen, relationship, job, whatever, that kind of like pulls you back in. And then you can kind of feel that density in your life again. You're like, oh, but it's like, how do you continue to evolve? And as the ego evolves, continue to evolve and say, okay, I'm letting go and saying like, I don't actually know. And the sooner that we can actually admit that we don't know, that we don't actually have control of the illusion of control, that's actually more of that pathway to to continuing that level of progress for me.
I think one of the hindrances we face on mass around the world is just our regular day-to-day lives. Our lives are so busy. I know so many people that I feel like they don't even have time to entertain the stuff that we are talking about here. What would be like a good, like one baby step, one step for humanity in the right direction to like get us out of that thing that you're talking about, letting go, the letting go of control. That is because everyone's stuck on survival mode. When you're stuck on survival mode, it's like, how do you really let go?
Yep. Yep. And I will speak from a place of a very deep correlation to this, because when I was working in investment banking, I would be working 80 to 100 hours a week perpetually for my career.
Crazy.
It was a lot. It was incessant.
Mm.
I was in the office every weekend. It was like on call. I would be on like a road trip with my friends. I'd log on from the car and my laptop. And so for a while, I fell off of any sort of spiritual practice because work was all consuming. It was everything. And then what happened after my mom passed, while I was still working at Goldman, I started to integrate meditation every day. First, it was in the morning, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I would wake up earlier. And then eventually I was like 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. And then it would get bigger, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 40 minutes. And people are like, well, there's no way I can do that. How do you add 2 additional hours to your day on top of everything else I was doing? Journaling, reading A Course in Miracles, other texts. What I would do is I actually completely shifted my schedule. So I would go to bed at like 7:30, 8 p.m. and I would wake up at like 3:30 in the morning. Because what happened was I was seeing such profound results with my meditation practice that I didn't want to sacrifice it. Because once you start to feel the change that it actually can do in your life, once you can start to feel the level of peace, and I was going through like people were screaming at me, selling millions of dollars of bonds every day. Like I was dealing with clients, like, and everyone was like, dude, how are you so calm? How are you so like relaxed and peaceful? And I was like, I'd look at them and I'd be like, oh, I meditate every day. And they would just be like, and like go back to work. But like, that's where if you actually start to feel that change in you, it starts to again pull you. And you're like, well, I got to get up 15 minutes, 20 minutes earlier so I can fit this in because it's that important.
Yeah, I feel like it should be stated the fact that you covered success first. You know, sometimes I think that an impediment would be like wrong timing or something. You know, like I'm kind of an extreme individual. You know, I would have trouble with a daily meditation practice. Mm-hmm. So instead, I'll take a week off and meditate 6 hours a day for a week, and then be extreme one way, and then have an extreme ego backlash. I think that that's not good. Actually, I'm saying like don't do as I have done. I like the idea of people doing things in proper order, and the fact that you covered your needs first, and then had a reunion with your spiritual side, and then it grew from that, and there was an incremental increase in your meditation. I think that that's probably good advice for people who have got their ducks in a row. Not that you can't start meditating if you're, you know, low income or something like that, but the incremental increase. I think that that's a good idea to be less chaotic, you know, and then see the benefits as they grow.
Yeah. Is there something that you could say? Because I totally hear what you're saying. I feel like in my own unique way, I had my own little meditation experience in my life over the last, few years. And I try to tell people like I find with meditation, it's like drops in a bucket. Mm-hmm. It's like we are so used to like, I want the thing now. I want the benefit and
yeah.
For me, it wasn't like that, man. It was like slow, like a trickle effect of like of change in my life. Is there something you could say that might get someone inspired to be like, oh, I gotta try this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. It's like this slow, continual burn almost. And I've been doing it for a quarter of a century now. So just putting things into perspective, how long I've been doing it, and the ability that opened up in terms of these intuitive faculties of mind, the ability to communicate with angels, the ability to the mediumship that has started to come through to communicate with souls on the other side. That really has only happened in the past 3 years, basically. So, like, do I want to discourage someone and be like, oh, it's going to take 22 years for you to get to that level? No, not at all. But what I'll say is, as with anything you do, it's consistency. Do you expect to start a new job and immediately be like, oh, wow, we're going to promote you to a managing director. We're going to promote you to a manager at this place, and you're doing amazing the second day you work there? No, like, it's the steady progression of being like, oh, wow, like, I've worked here and I've made my way. And but will you have those magical people who are like these prodigies, Eckhart Tolle, who's sitting on a bench and basically became enlightened? Yeah, totally. That's totally gonna happen. But it's all about consistency. And what I'll say is, we're always so focused on the outcome. But if you actually think about it, that's 1% of the entire journey. The journey is actually 99% to get you to the outcome. And what you learn along that 99%, the habits you instill in yourself, the way your life changes, the people you meet, the practices you do, that is actually what the purpose is. That's actually what it's for.
Oh, I got another good question.
That's a good answer.
I got another good question for you. Because I know there's the highly pragmatic crowd out there, the super scientific, that they would have a really hard time. But like, if you were talking to your old Wall Street self, like, out there, what would you say to that person who's like, they're full of disbelief, that this is all crazy nonsense, woo woo, what do you say to that guy?
So it's funny you ask this, because I literally wrote my book on this topic. I wrote a book called Banking on Angels, which is like banking, investment banking, angels. Because what I do is I intertwine spirituality, positive psychology, and science, because I'm a very reason-oriented person. I can't work in that analytical industry behind spreadsheets and PowerPoints all day and not like want to understand the facts. So if you actually look back over time, starting with quantum physicists in the 1800s, 1900s, they actually talk about all of these concepts. And so that's what I explain. Understanding, how do you get down to understanding everything is energy? Well, if you look at the quantum level, the level of quarks, even deeper than electrons and photons, you'll see that everything is vibrating at a fast frequency once you actually zoom in, and that there's actually 99.99999% empty space. And so actually, if you go into these various practices, from gratitude to meditation, to even affirmations and reprogramming the subconscious mind, to the concept of letting go, to these concepts of manifestation, there's specific science that is now starting to back all of this up. Meditation improves cortical thickness, improves your ability to be resilient towards difficulties, reduces stress in your life, improves your ability to sleep. Gratitude improves your ability to connect with others, improves your ability to be empathetic, improves your interpersonal abilities, improves your resilience yet again. Letting go. Well, the Heart Math Institute has now found that you can feel and actually measure the field of the heart up to 3 meters away using specific scientific instruments. And it is the largest electromagnetic field in the body. Well, what happens when we hold on to emotions is they get trapped in the body. They can get trapped in organs, or they can get trapped within the heart field. Simply consciously taking a minute of your day to let that go from your energy field by saying, I consciously release this, writing it down and saying it to yourself, completely opens up that space for you. So all of these aspects that have been spiritual, that are like too out there for people, well, the beauty of it is science is now starting to back all of it up.
Can we go another level deeper? I'm sorry, I know you got questions, but I want to go one more level deeper.
Let's do it.
So yeah, you've got your highly pragmatic scientist type, and we like, if you've watched anything on our channel, you know that we got people from all types of walks of life that watch our content. Now, from say a fundamentalist religious state, there's people who might be scared of your content. They might think that, like, if I start meditating, I'm going to let demons in, or you've got an angel deck. like, and that's forbidden in maybe their spiritual book. What do you say to that person to like bring some levity or
That's
ease?
not us, by the way. We've got tarot cards and stuff.
Yes.
No, I totally know. But I'll share a story that's actually very aligned with this. So I do a lot of traveling in my life. I lead various retreats through Egypt, through Morocco, the Middle East. And so I was actually in both Morocco and Egypt this year. And my guide in Morocco, I basically told him what I did. I took this trip by myself, told him what I did, and we became very good friends by the end of it after you spend 14 days with someone. I was like, so what do you think about what I do? And he told me, he was like, well, in our culture, you are like considered like basically like a witch. Like you're like sort of this like wizard person. Like we don't really, you don't really know what to do with that. Um, but then like what we talked about was it actually came back to this concept of there's many paths, but there's one truth. And there's many paths that you can take, which is the beauty of life. There's no one right way to live life. You can be a Christian, you can be a Hindu, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Muslim, you can be an atheist, you can be whatever you want to be. But there's a singularity of truth, and it all comes back to that singularity of truth. And that truth is that we are love. And my belief is that we have two purposes here on this earth. It is to create and to love. And as you do that in service to others, the rest of it falls into place. And again, you can come back to any avenue of thought to come into this understanding, but it's all this remembrance that we are a cohesive unity. And that's the importance of all of it. You are me, I am you. If you want to think about it this way, there's a spotlight that's shining down on Earth. And if you want to break that spotlight up into like little tiny squares, and each square is a human that's shining down on Earth, well, if you look back up at the spotlight, all of these humans are from that exact same light. They're from that exact same being. They may have different religions, different races, different orientations, different appearances, but it's all part of that singularity of source light consciousness that we all are.
Well said. Do you have something?
Yes. Okay. So I do like the idea of unification among people. I don't like the idea of any real life violence or war or anything like that. But we've got different kinds of entertainment and stuff in our world, and I'd be lying if I didn't say I've watched an action movie or whatever. But it does seem like I've encountered people where I'm like, I wish the world would be unified. I wish everybody be like this. We could all be together. And some people where they're at, they're like, no, I don't want I like division. I like separateness. And there's all kinds of eclectic ways that people enjoy life, So as much as I'm into the idea of unity and love being some overarching theme here, and that's where we're going, I guess I struggle to reconcile the things that you encounter that are like real world. It might be a hard sell to somebody that has a lot of trauma, for instance. They might be like, they can't get it because they're battling too many demons from things that they've encountered that were outside of themselves. They encountered that. So how do you break through to somebody? How do you really get them on board with aligning with love, aligning with a greater purpose, and moving in a positive direction in life? Somebody that's very confused,
A few things. One, it's always the question of asking why, and almost to the point of feigning ignorance. Because what happens as you do so is you just pose the question. And what you'll find most often is that block that person is choosing to hold on to is oftentimes very sort of dense separation and from this feeling of love, right? And so as you start to question it, dig into it, just asking questions, it will naturally start to unravel itself. And it may take weeks, months, even years, but it will slowly start to unravel itself. And then the other aspect comes back to your point of spiral dynamics, or if you want to think about Maslow's pyramid, I think it's also about relating to people where they are, because I can't necessarily go to someone who is in the slums of India who is struggling to have their next meal provided for them, even clean water, and be, oh, why aren't you just living in a state of love consciousness right now? Like, what are you doing? Like that's not how that works. Because I think you have to meet people where they are. And everyone is going through different life situations and different circumstances. And I think it's about having that empathy for the fellow person. And if you are in a space to be able to give, that's why tithing, I think, is so important. If you are in a space to be able to give to help elevate someone else, well, if you come back to your own view or my own view that everything is one and that person is you, well, then you're helping yourself by actually helping them. Because if it's almost this feeling of you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so if you can help elevate people for wherever they are to lift them up, well, then that's only helping them expand and evolve.
Good. We've asked a lot of deep questions. I want to lighten it here. You've been traveling lately. You mentioned you went to Egypt. That story you had about the friend there from Morocco, was that your trip to Egypt that you just did?
No, that was a trip to Morocco I did in June.
Oh, Morocco. Okay, but you did just go to Egypt, didn't
I
you?
did just go to Egypt 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
You're busy. You're all over the place. You just
Oh,
having
that's
fun, or
cool.
you just chilling,
No.
or?
So Egypt, I led a retreat group through Egypt, and we actually had private openings in the pyramids and various temples, and I led different ceremonies, so like voice toning and vocal activations in the king's chamber on a full
Wow.
moon, and different like love ceremonies on the Nile River and Isis's temple of love, Philae Temple. And it was just this 10-day excursion through the secrets of ancient Egypt. And so that's something I'm going to be continuing to do. It's something I love. I love Egypt, the ancient
So
history.
that sounds awesome. Is that like a contract that you have, like with those people to go do that, or just how do you set that up? Is
Oh,
that part
this is
part of your
actually
thing?
talk about life flowing through you. I planned this trip to Egypt, Jordan, and Israel with my mom in January of 2020, before everything shut down. We had the itinerary. We were literally about to send the payment. March comes, everything shuts down. This trip that I planned with my mom basically doesn't happen. And then my mom passes on. And then I leave my job at Goldman in 2022. And I say, you know what? I'm going to use the itinerary I booked with my mom, take this trip by myself to honor her. And so after I left, I took that trip by myself through Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. I became friends with an amazing guide for part of my journey on the Nile River. He's from the lineage of the last great Pharaonic Masons. And
Oh.
he was like, we basically connected very deeply on spirituality, because a lot of the guides in Egypt that you'll find, they actually suppress what they like want to say about energy or spirituality or the actual purpose of the pyramids. But I basically like really like I was like, yo, I'm really spiritual here. Like, let's talk about this stuff. And we connected. And he was like, and I was like, I had a past life remembrance experience in Karnak Temple. It's in Luxor. There's these 7 doors to the afterlife that the Egyptians believe in. And so I walked into one of these temples. It's a huge temple complex. I meditated and put my hand on this door in Horus's temple. And I was immediately flashed back to that exact same temple. It was painted, it was lit by a torchlight.
Wow.
And I was like, this is going to sound crazy, but I've been here before. And then his friend who came with us, he was like, next time you come, you need to spend 3 days in Karnak. And then after I left, I was like, I posted on Instagram. I was like, I need to bring people back here to have these deep experiences like I just had. And then as things unfolded, I was like, hey, can you help me organize a trip like this? And he was like, of course. And he's the one who actually like worked with the antiquities department in Egypt, the Egyptian Ministry of Culture, and organized for these entire like special openings. And it became this basically like beautiful spiritual pilgrimage where people had like a Mormon gentleman, an older gentleman, had an out of body experience while
Wow. Oh,
while I was
Mormon.
leading a voice toning activation in the king's chamber in the pyramid.
That's
And and
awesome.
and if you want to talk about transcending religions, it's all of that. Like this is someone who is very ingrained in sort of a path that he's been on for 40, 50 years. And he told me, he was like, I basically like left my body. I went out of the pyramid.
Wow.
I was like, okay, like there's deeper truths happening here.
And then you jumped from Egypt, and I saw you were at Burning Man.
I was at Burning Man.
That must have been a wild year to go to Burning Man this year, from what I hear.
Talk about how to truly surrender. Like really, it's like, okay, there's 3 months of rain for the region falling in 24 hours.
Oh my gosh.
You surrender into saying, okay, you're stuck here for the next 3 days.
Welcome to Thunderdome.
It was funny because like I saw you were so calm, you were doing that like meditation. I was watching the video and like you could hear the trance music in the background like pounding. I was just laughing. I was like, "That's got. How does he like? How are they gonna focus?"
Yeah, and you can hear like this art car that was like going by the. Yeah, no. And the journey honestly continues onward. So, I actually earlier this year became very interested in something called a silent dark retreat. And so there's a place in Lake Atitlan, Guatemala, which has a lot of very steeped Mayan history to it. Very sacred lake, very powerful energetic center in Guatemala that has a place that you can go to do a silent dark retreat called the Hermitage. They have an extensive wait list. And so I emailed them back in May, and they didn't have spots till 2024. And then I randomly got a message actually while I was in Egypt a couple of weeks ago being like, we have an opening for December in these dates if you would like to come. And I was like, I'm clear, like moving my meetings and calls, like I need to go do this. So for 12 days in early December, I'll actually be going to partake in a silent dark retreat by myself, going into the darkness to basically just meditate. And
no ayahuasca? No nothing?
But you're familiar with that. I know you because some of you have done that, which is like I got a million questions about that. But I'm just like, if I was only given the chance to ask one question about any psychedelic retreat, it'd be like maybe what was the most profound insight you took out of?
Good questions tonight, man.
Maybe your psychedelic experience.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I've been really grateful to be able to experience a lot of these experiences from ayahuasca to psilocybin to ketamine to all these various experiences on psychedelics. I'll say that these medicines are exactly that. They're medicines, and they're incredibly powerful to allow you to open your perspective of consciousness to seeing different neurological pathways. And you talked about in the beginning, people want these quick fixes, right? And so meditation, well, it's a slower burn. The benefit of psychedelics, I'll say, is that it can rapidly create a new neurological pathway for yourself, because once two neurons fire together, they wire together. And once you see a perceived version of reality, you cannot unsee it. And so it's very profound in allowing people to sort of take these steps into spirituality. But this is the biggest takeaway. They're simply window shopping. Ayahuasca, psilocybin, you're going through and looking at it from the window on a substance, on a medicine. The way to actually go into that doorway through, it's like looking into a house. Like you can see what's going on the inside. You're like, wow, this is really cool. But I want to be inside of that house. The way you do that is actually meditation. So you can create those quick instances, but the way to actually go through it is putting in some of that effort.
That's kind of a unique perspective. I've never really, like, I've heard many of the stuff you just said about it, like how it can trigger, like it can accelerate almost some new understandings about things. But I like what you said about, window shopping.
I think it can be a bit of a slow burn too. I think sometimes even if it does open a neural pathway, sometimes it might take some time for that to like congeal or whatever and manifest in your life as like a different behavior. I think that psychedelics can do that.
Totally. And that's why honestly integration is the most powerful thing, because you can have this flash in the pan experience and then go back to your normal life and then get bombarded with all the work emails and all the family stuff, and then you're just back to where you were and you just had this nice little experience that is just that. But how do you carry that practice with you of what you experienced? Maybe you saw some things, saw some visions, maybe you healed some traumas, maybe you came to some deep realizations about yourself, maybe you removed limiting beliefs, maybe you opened your heart more, maybe you connected to your spirituality, opened your third eye. Like, how do you carry that with you? And actually, one of the best ways to do that, super simple, journaling. Like, no one does it, but it is so powerful because it's how the soul actually speaks. You create separation from the thought. That's why things like talk therapy are great, but talk therapy and journaling. But what also happens when you journal, you're somatically releasing that. Your body is creating a connection to you writing that. You're perceiving it back as you read it to yourself, and you're creating the separation from thought. Super simple. No one wants to make 5 minutes a day to do it.
Sometimes I wish you could just let go. Some of us have maybe a little more bad karma than others, and sometimes sometimes I wish you could just I give in. Fine, whatever, take me. But I guess some of us just maybe have a little more work than others. But I do think it's important to remember gratitude and remember where you came from and where you are and where you're going.
All right, let's do it. Let's do the card thing.
Yeah,
let's shift. We're gonna. I know
terrified.
nothing about this. I've never done. I don't know. Is it kind of like tarot reading or?
A little bit. So what I'll ask you, what we're gonna do today, is a 3-card reading, and I can do it for both of you combined, which will be sort of a more overarching, energetic feel of where you want to go, what's happening in your life, something to take away. Or I can do it for one of you individually who has a very specific question in a specific area of your life. So you tell me what you would like.
What do you want to do?
Let's do the double dose.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So we'll basically, I'll ask you to set the intention to, you tell me, what is your intention with doing this collective reading? What would you like to receive from this?
Buddhahood. I'm just kidding. Guidance maybe for the channel.
Guidance, yeah, that's a good guidance for the channel. Well said.
Guidance for Stay Spiritual for the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Amazing. So I have this deck of angel cards, and so while you may not see it, it's going to be laid down in front of me here. I usually go through sort of an opening way of ceremony. But given that this is, a show, we want to be time cognizant here. I will just ask you to do a very brief sort of grounding with me, taking a few breaths, feeling into gratitude, calling in your angels, and then we'll go into it, okay?
All right.
Close your eyes, roll your shoulders back and down, and we're going to take a few deep breaths here, breathing in through the nose, down into the belly. So breathing in through the nose, exhaling through the mouth. And as you do this, bring in a feeling of deep gratitude in the center of your chest. Breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. Allow this gratitude to expand in through the nose and out through the mouth. This gratitude washes over your body. And if you can feel into what color that has, feel that color as it washes through your body, continuing to breathe on your own, into your auric field around you. In this space, consciously call in the energy of your guardian angels, spirit guides, beings of love and light energy. As you do so, feel their unconditional loving presence surround you. Take one last breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. And when you're ready, you can return back. Awesome. So now I'll just ask you to recite a brief angel blessing after me. And that's basically to intentionalize this. So my hands are going to be on these cards. Imagine your hands are on these cards with me. And repeat this blessing after me. Thank you, angels.
Thank you, angels.
And energetic beings.
And energetic beings.
Of love and light.
Of love and light.
For revealing to us.
For revealing to us.
What we need to know.
What we need to know.
We are willing to listen.
We are willing to listen.
And receive your guidance.
And receive your guidance.
So we say, and so it is.
So we say, and so it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, angels of James and Justin, for revealing to James and Justin through me what they need to know for their highest good and wisdom and the highest good of all. May we be clear and open channels of communication, free of energetic distortion, for the highest good of all. So we say, and so it is, Taisha into Doe, Taisha into Doe, Taisha into Doe, spoken as it is stated, and so it is done. Thank you. So now with your energy and intention in these cards, I'm just going to shuffle them one last time. I'm going to pick 3 cards from your energy. So the first initial message that comes through with this is that the work that you guys are doing is having a profound impact on the hearts of people. And so as this came through for me, it's a very powerful energy that was coming through my heart. And your angels want to acknowledge that what you're doing is you're actually shifting people's energy to be more heart-centered, to be more in the space of love. And so going through the specific spread that you guys received from this, the first card you received is raise your vibration. And so your angels want to acknowledge that one of the greatest strengths that you guys have in what you're doing with the channel is that you are collectively raising the vibration of human consciousness. You are sharing what is meant to be heard from deep spiritual thinkers, from ways that are causing people to create different perceptions within themselves, see different ways of understanding. And as a result, as people integrate literally the frequency that you are conveying on your channel, the people that you are having on your channel, the way that you are sharing this with the world, you are actually having a profound impact with raising the frequency of the planet, of the viewers, of the people who are finding your work. And so your angels want to acknowledge that one of the greatest strengths, the greatest strength that the channel has right now is the collective ability that you two are putting into the field of raising the energetic vibration of this planet right now. One of the things that they want to acknowledge in your heart, and this is a message that your angels want to come through. It's something that you may feel within you, you may know, but you may not totally give yourself credit for. And it's this feeling of when we receive a message from outside of ourselves, it's arguably even more powerful than if we tell it to ourselves. And what your angels want to tell you is that you are actually creating an incredibly deeply threaded web of what is happening. So your angels want to acknowledge that there's this aspect of quantum entanglement. And so what you're doing as you interact with different beings on this planet doing different work, you are actually entangling your energy. You're creating a level of connection that is enlivening you, that is connecting you. And in a way, it's flourishing from a space of deep love is what you're doing. And so this comes with a card of romance and connection. So while it may not necessarily be, maybe not, you're going to meet your soulmate on one of these things, but what the message is actually saying is you're creating a deep level of love felt connection that is weaving a thread of deep spiritual thinkers that are creating a quantum entanglement with yourself through your channel. And as a result, when you convey the frequency that you need to convey on these channels, you are connecting to those other people. So you're creating these vast webs from the presenters that you have on with yourselves, with then also all of the listeners and viewers. So even if you, for example, you had Sarah on the other day, well, you're creating a web between yourselves, me, Sarah, and all of the listeners and viewers who are watching these shows. So you're creating this dynamic of quantum entanglement that is very love and heart-centered. The aspect that they want to acknowledge, which may be sort of I'll say it's a focus that's going to be very top of mind for you guys, is an aspect of harmony and resolution. And so what this comes with is, I don't know what's necessarily happening behind the scenes, but if there's any instances or aspects where things necessarily aren't totally aligned with either of you, maybe there's someone who wants to ask specific questions, maybe there's someone who wants to steer the show in a specific way, maybe there's someone who has specific ideas of how they want to take this that may not totally align with the other person. your angels want to acknowledge that there's a level of deeper harmony which can be reached within the relationship of both of you. And as a result of coming into that space of deeper understanding, you guys will actually be able to help propel the show and the channel even further. But it is a focus, arguably a little bit of a challenge that's going to present itself for sort of the near immediate future. However, what your angels want to acknowledge is that this challenge isn't just in a vacuum. The way that you actually come through and elevate through this challenge is by continuing to rely on the strength that you have, which is coming into remembering that you are collectively raising the vibration of humanity and elevating consciousness. And as a result, how do you bring greater unity and cohesiveness and connection to everyone, and remembering why you are doing what you're doing, how you can continue to be of service, and how you can continue to be heart-centered and love-based as you spread your message and do your work. So that is how you reach that state of harmony and resolution amongst both of you. That's the initial message your angels have. And honestly, this is an open channel. I know we're at time or whatever, but this is actually an open channel of communication when I do these readings. So if you have questions, you can ask them.
Yeah, I'm pretty mystified. So a lot of good stuff there. First of all, high five. And then it feels like some responsibility, actually, you know?
Yeah.
In a good way. In a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just taking it in. I didn't really have any questions. I don't have any questions. I just taking it in, and you know, I guess I'll have to meditate on it and think about it, and and keep rolling with it.
Sure.
But yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. And I'm sure this is something that you do with your clients and stuff like that out there. Maybe a good time right now would be for those out there who, you know, have seen you do this and they've loved our conversation and they want to get a hold of you. Maybe like, what do you got going on? How can they find you? How can they reach out to you and find out what you got going on?
Totally. The best ways are social media. So I'm actually on Instagram at Neal, Neal Bakshi, B as in boy, AKSHI. My website, nealbakshi.com. I have a newsletter, and sort of a lot of things are unfolding. So I'm leading the Egypt retreat again next year. That's already in stone. Leading a bunch of other retreats, from plant medicine ceremony therapy to men's retreats, do angel readings. And so it just continues to evolve. Do spiritual coaching. So teach breath work. So there's a lot of different things. And so the best way to find me is honestly social media and my website, and feel free to just send me a note. I'd love to just hear what's going on with people. And yeah.
We'll leave links in the description for your stuff where people can find you. So they'll be good to go there. But you know, I want to thank you so much, Neal,
that was
for coming
amazing.
on the show. That was amazing.
That was
amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank
it was great having you. Uplifting, beautiful, great conversation. Thanks for coming out, man.
Thanks for having me. You guys are excellent questionnaires, if that's the word, questionnaire. You guys are we went deep into consciousness really fast, and not many people go that deep that quickly. And I will say your guys' minds work, and the questions you asked, profound.